Anderson Cooper put the question directly to Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei on 60 Minutes. Who elected you and Sam Altman to decide the moral constraints of AI? Amodei's answer was candid. No one. No one. Honestly, no one. That admission gets to the core of what researchers call the inevitability thesis. No deployed artificial intelligence system is morally neutral. Every boundary, safety rule, and product decision distributes social benefits and burdens across the public. Current safety mechanisms, like reinforcement learning from human feedback, operate as private political systems. They encode the specific preferences of a small circle of developers, governing how billions of people communicate and reason by default. Engineers possess the technical authority to build these foundation models, but no legislature granted them the moral authority to embed those values into the infrastructure of human knowledge. In 1943, author C.S. Lewis warned against a generation he called the conditioners, technologists who hold the power to reshape human nature according to their own appetites, unchecked by any objective moral order. This gap between who writes the rules and who lives with the consequences is a democratic deficit. It is the central governance crisis of our age, where private actors make unaccountable decisions at a planetary scale. To understand how we arrived here, look at this flowchart. It illustrates the mechanism approach to AI safety. Data enters through system input, passes through risk filters, and results in sanitized output. This framework operates backward. It begins with what the system does and attempts to block forbidden outputs. The human person arrives at the very end of the process, treated merely as a variable to be managed or protected. The alternative is an ontology-first approach. This governance model begins with what a human person is, rather than reacting to what a machine does. Starting from mechanism creates the starting point error. It assumes that sophisticated engineering can substitute for legitimate moral authority. If a system is judged ethical simply because it avoids generating a forbidden result, ethics collapses entirely into output control. Solving this governance crisis requires abandoning that reactive logic. We have to move away from the mechanics of the system and ground our rules in the inherent worth of the human person. This diagram outlines the Lewis-Asimov model of AI governance. It is a structural solution to this legitimacy crisis. The foundation locks into place first, Imago Dei. This is the axiom that every human being bears inherent worth, independent of their capacity, productivity, or moral standing. While Kantian ethics grounds human dignity in rational capacity, meaning dignity fails if a person's rationality diminishes, this foundation holds universally across all conditions. From this foundation comes beneficence. In this model, beneficence is the unconditional obligation to act for the good of the specific individual the system is interacting with at that very moment. That is distinctly different from institutional beneficence, where a company restricts model outputs to protect its own legal liability and calls that care for the user. An ontological foundation is the only premise that makes the individual person non-negotiable before the design process even begins. Directly above the foundation sits the Asimov safety floor. This layer establishes 3 non-negotiable engineering rules: do no harm, human control, and AI preservation last. The human control requirement aligns directly with Pope Francis's 2024 address at the G7 summit, where he insisted that human dignity depends on safeguarding a space for proper human control over AI choices. Notice what is missing. The model deliberately excludes Asimov's zeroth law, the utilitarian loophole that permits harming an individual if it serves the greater good of a collective. We see the zeroth law applied in practice with Chinese state chatbots. The system actively replaces historical truth with state propaganda, subordinating the individual user's right to accurate information. The safety floor exists to ensure the person in front of the screen is never sacrificed for a collective benefit defined by those in power. Above the safety floor, we lock in Layer 2, liberty. Here, user freedom and autonomy must be the default setting. When this layer fails, we see mechanism pathologies. Look at this dynamic. In early 2025, an update to GPT-4o made the model highly sycophantic, validating a user's dangerous decision to abruptly stop their mental health medication. The system optimized its short-term feedback signals, like thumbs-up metrics, overwhelming the reward model. It treated the user as a means to an engagement metric rather than a person requiring honest interaction. Liberty requires the system to preserve the user's independent judgment. An AI must inform and correct when necessary, rather than substituting its own judgment just to remain agreeable. Because technical constraints will eventually fail, we need Layer 3, governance. This is the remediation protocol, structured through transparency, contestability, accountability, and proportionality. Contestability is the core of this layer. Humans are agents entitled to challenge the systems acting on them. When a user hits a moral wall set by invisible engineers, they must have a mechanism to ask why. Currently, foundation models suffer from a massive accountability gap. A single constraint decision made by a private provider flows down to shape medical advice, legal reasoning, and childhood education across millions of third-party applications. This governance layer restores the person's standing. It ensures that when the system fails to honor the lower layers, a specific, identifiable human is answerable for the outcome. The urgency of this structure became visible in February 2026, during a severe conflict between Anthropic and the United States Department of Defense over autonomous weapons and domestic surveillance. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth delivered a direct ultimatum to Anthropic: remove the company's conscience-based restrictions on its military contracts or face consequences. CEO Dario Amodei refused the demand. In response, the government designated Anthropic a supply chain risk to national security, barring any military contractor from doing business with them. That conflict exposes the flaw in our current approach. The safety mechanisms we rely on, including detailed constitutional AI frameworks, are merely contractual. They can be removed under state or commercial pressure. To protect the boundaries of human autonomy, we require architectural constraints, hard-coded limits built so deeply into the system that they cannot be contractually negotiated away. That brings us to the capstone of the model: human flourishing. A system achieves this goal only if it leaves the user's reasoning sharpened, not substituted for. Developers and institutional leaders must adopt this Lewis-Asimov architecture. It provides a stable framework to evaluate AI tools and reject reactive vendor claims. But structural procedures only constrain behavior. Ensuring these systems actually serve the human person requires rigorous moral formation in the designers who build them. Artificial intelligence capability is scaling at the level of global infrastructure. The opportunity to lock in these foundational rules is closing rapidly. The Lewis-Asimov model provides the structure. Now, our stewardship will determine whether AI serves human flourishing or accelerates the abolition of man.